So we said that in a historical narrative, what the author does is he looks at the time period he wants to discuss. And he chooses either the particular events or the dimensions of that time period that really tell the story he's interested in telling, or that make the point that he's interested in making. One of the other things that the author can do is reorder the events in a way that emphasizes what he wants to emphasize, or makes his point. Now, I should probably explain this here, that reordering events, the author is not walking out of nonfiction into fiction now. Sometimes in our modern expectations, we want everything to be perfectly chronological, and if there's reordering, we feel that's not truthful. And we have to remind ourselves of two things. First, this isn't pure history. It is a historical narrative, and then it's a history and it's a narrative. But the other thing is that our expectations or our demands that the author remain purely chronological are modern. The biblical authors did not have those expectations put on them, or those requirements where they had to stay perfectly within chronological order to be considered truthful or honest or accurate. Those are modern expectations that we have. And so we have to back ourselves up and say, okay, the author is allowed to do this, and it's still history. So I'll just start with that. Now, why would somebody want to reorder things in the first place? Well, let's take a look at the various motivations. One is the author wants his reader to understand something at a different point in the story than when it actually occurred. So let's say, for example, let's take Jesus cleansing the temple. Now, if Jesus cleansing the temple took place at the end of, or towards the end of his ministry, as it does in the Synoptic Gospels, in John, Jesus cleansing the temple occurs at the beginning of his ministry. It seems, one way or the other, that John wants it at the beginning, not because he's concerned with preserving chronological order, but really because he wants the reader to know something about Jesus at the beginning of the story. And that cleansing of the temple tells that part, and so that's why he puts it at the beginning. So right at the outset, by putting the temple cleansing towards the beginning of the ministry, Jesus is seen to have authority over the temple, to have some kind of divine authority, actually, that not even the temple leaders have. And he wants you to see it right at the beginning of his ministry. So that's one example of why somebody would reorder it, or reorder history, excuse me. Now, another reason is that the author may feel that the events interpret each other. So let's say you have two events that occurred at two completely different times, but that if you put them next to each other, they could explain or interpret one another. In Mark, for example, when Jesus cleanses the temple in Mark, he sandwiches the story of Jesus cursing the fig tree around the cleansing of the temple. So the way it happens in Mark is Jesus is going towards the temple. He sees a fig tree that doesn't have any fruit, so he curses the fig tree. He goes into the temple, he cleanses it, and then on his way out, the disciples see that the fig tree has been withered. This is in contrast to other Gospels where Jesus curses the fig tree and it withers right in front of the apostles' eyes. Now, in Mark has split up that story and put it the story of the fig tree and put it around the temple, because he wants the readers to see the connection between a tree that doesn't bear fruit, and Jesus curses and it withers, to this temple that it is not bearing spiritual fruit, and it's going to have its day, or its end. And so he kind of wants to see that correlation there, even though he has to take events out of order and even split them up. He's not being untruthful, he's not being inaccurate. In fact, if you pay attention to Mark's really careful wording in Mark, you can see he's trying to cautiously word it in a way that you can understand that it is the cursing of the fig tree maybe wasn't split up around the cleansing of the temple. So that's an example of when the author feels that an event can interpret another event. So they relocate it, either sandwiching it like that, or just putting it next to another event. Another thing the author could do is combine the material by subject matter. So for example, if Jesus does a lot of teaching throughout his ministry about a certain thing, when the author sits down to write his story, it is instead of spreading out throughout the whole gospel, he just collects all the information and he puts it in one spot. And so just to make it easier to understand and to give the story some structure. There actually isn't a fourth point here, so I'll just delete that. But there you have it. So why would the author reorder things? It's because he wants the reader to understand something at a different point in the story than when it actually occurred. The events, if they're placed near each other, they could interpret one another and help you see correlation. Or finally, the material needs to be grouped together by subject matter so that it gives the story an easier flow of thought, or easier flow. So how do we make sense of the order? Well, I suggest two things. First, pay attention when the author chooses to develop themes and ideas. So as you're reading the story and as things occur, really think about the order of them. I mean, it sounds kind of obvious, but really just think about when stuff is introduced and why it could be that, why the author would want those things, these ideas or themes being developed in this way. The next thing is, especially if you're in the Gospels and you know that something has been changed around, try and think of why the event has been relocated. What is the connection that this event has with the material around it? Sometimes, for you to be able to do this, you have to know that the event has been misplaced chronologically on purpose in order for you to really think about this. But in either way, what you're looking to do is pay attention to the order of events, and when you know that something has been relocated or moved chronologically, ask yourself why. Why would the author want you to know this at this point in the story? And that's really the overall sense of that question.